an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler, brought to you by Danique. In this episode, I'm covering the first 2 chapters, and so very much happens in these first 2 chapters that I'm already a little bit worried about being able to cover them all. But good Lord, this is going to be really interesting. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everybody. I am Natasha. This book, you guys, this is going to be something. I wasn't ready at all for how this was going to go. I got to read you, for those of you who have not read this, and those of you who have, to give you an idea of why I'm just so like, what? Here goes the prologue opening of this book. Here we are, energy, mass, life, shaping life, mind, shaping mind, God, shaping God. Consider, we are born, not with purpose, but with potential. They'll make a god of her. I think that would please her if she could know about it. In spite of all her protests and denials, she's always needed devoted, obedient followers, disciples who would listen to her and believe everything she told them. And she needed large events to manipulate. All gods seem to need these things. Her legal name was Lauren Olamina Bancole. To those who loved her or hated her, she was simply Olamina. She was my biological mother. She is dead. I have wanted to love her and to believe that what happened between her and me wasn't her fault. I've wanted that. But instead I've hated her, feared her, needed her. I've never trusted her, though. Never understood how she could be the way she was, so focused and yet so misguided. There for all the world, but never there for me. I still don't understand. And now that she's dead, I'm not sure I ever will. But I must try because I need to understand myself. And she is part of me. I wish that she weren't, but she is. In order for me to understand who I am, I must begin to understand who she was. That is my reason for writing and assembling this book. It has always been my way to sort through my feelings by writing. She and I had that in common. And along with the need to write, she also developed a need to draw. If she had been born in a saner time, she might have become a writer as I have, or an artist. I've gathered a few of her drawings, although she gave most of these away during her lifetime, and I have copies of all that was saved of her writings. Even some of her early paper notebooks have been copied to disc or crystal and saved. She had a habit during her youth of hiding caches of food, money, and weaponry in out-of-the-way places or with trusted people, and being able to go straight back to these years later. These saved her life several times, and also they saved her words, her journals and notes, and my father's writings. She managed to badger him into writing a little. He wrote well, although he didn't like doing it. I'm glad she badgered him. I'm glad to have known him at least through his writing. I wonder why I'm not glad to have known her through hers. God is change, my mother believed. That was what she said in the first of her verses in Earthseed, the Book of the Living. All that you touch, you change. All that you change, changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. The words are harmless, I suppose, and metaphorically true. At least she began with some species of truth. And now she's touched me one last time with her memories, her life, and her damned Earthseed. Well, shit. Guys. What? So, the last book, we're there with Lauren. Everything that she's writing, she writes right after it happens. And it's very clear that we're reading along with it as she writes it. and I will say this. There is absolutely nothing in the writing that I could point to as evidence of this. It is presented as simply entries in a journal. However, there is absolutely nothing presented to disprove that we're reading it as she writes it either. And for me, you take it the way that it's presented to you. Now, this book, aside, like the prologue, is not the only time that we hear from her child. I think her daughter, right? I think this is also a woman. The commentary pops up again here and there. But other than that, it is still presented to us in a... What is it that they call that? I know it's not pictographic, lithographic, it's something like this. But it's a series of journal entries. Epistolary? Is that what I want? But with the commentary, it's all in retrospect. All of this has happened a long time ago. And so, rather than the kind of tension that we had initially, when we were very first reading this as if it were happening, and wondering what would happen. Are they going to make it through? Is everybody going to be okay? Who's going to survive? Who isn't? All of that. Instead of that kind of tension, what we have now is the tension of, well, we know that she's going to survive, but we also know that she's going to have a child, and we also know that she is likely going to reach a level of notoriety that we were not ready for at all, and that her child is going to hate her and resent her. It starts off with her child saying she would be happy that they made her into a god, which is a hell of a thing to be happy about. Like, I don't know how any of you would feel about that, but you know, the idea of being made into a god has no appeal to me whatsoever. As much as I am vain and prideful and, you know, love that, like, the idea of power. First of all, if you're made into a god, that power is not yours. It's invented and it's after you're dead. So you don't actually get to enjoy any of that power that you're being given posthumously. Secondly, being made into a god means that nobody knows who you actually are. Being made into a god means that any human traits, any mistakes that you have are going to be diminished, treated as like, what's the word I want? They're going to be treated as the exception, and momentary lapses from your godlike attitude, rather than an integral part of your personality and an indicator of who you are. Which means anything about you as a person that made you important, as a person that made you who you are, is going to be left by the wayside in favor of whatever anyone else wants to put on you and decide is your personality. And that, for me, has no appeal at all. It's just so... you become a symbol. And that, to me, is just so... it's dehumanizing, and it's people using you for something that they need. I'm my own person. I don't want anybody doing that, you know? At the same time, if you're already dead, does it harm anything? Does it matter? I don't know. I would say if you still have living relatives, it harms them probably. I mean, it doesn't seem like her child is dealing all that well with what's happening, and it hasn't even begun yet. But yeah, I'm just, this whole, like, revelation was so unexpected, presenting this whole thing from this perspective. I was just floored by it. And the first piece that we get, the first bit of writing, is actually by Bankole. It's not from Lauren's writings, but it's written in such a way as to be very similar. He writes some poems about Earthseed. Darkness gives shape to the light, as light shapes the darkness. Death gives shape to life, as life shapes death. The universe and God share this wholeness, each defining the other. God gives shape to the universe, as the universe shapes God. I have read that the period of, and this is from his writings, I have read that the period of upheaval that journalists have begun to refer to as the apocalypse, or more commonly, more bitterly, the pox, lasted from 2015 through 2030, a decade and a half of chaos. This is untrue. The pox has been a much longer torment. It began well before 2015, perhaps even before the turn of the millennium. It has not ended. I've also read that the pox was caused by accidentally coinciding climactic, economic, and sociological crises. It would be more honest to say that the pox was caused by our own refusal to deal with obvious problems in those areas. We caused the problems, and then we sat and watched as they grew into crises. I've heard people deny this, but I was born in 1970. I've seen enough to know that it's true. I've watched education become more a privilege of the rich than the basic necessity that it must be if civilized society is to survive. I've watched as convenience, profit, and inertia excused greater and more dangerous environmental degradation. I've watched poverty, hunger, and disease become inevitable for more and more people. And that whole paragraph, by the way, was underlined by hundreds of people, according to Kindle. Because it just seems true, everybody. And I'm going to warn you all right now that I ain't going to be able to avoid talking about politics when I talk about this book. Because Octavia Butler predicted the future to such a fucking fine point that she's able to nail down the exact slogan that President Trump uses, and it's giving me chills right now. Like, this bitch knew what the fuck was up. And this was written in 94, I think? I'm going to check right now. Parable of the Talents. Octavia Butler. All right. 1998. All right, cool. So I was in high school when it came out. I just can't, you guys, when we get there. It's so depressing. Okay, so moving on. Amid all of this, somehow, the United States of America suffered a major non-military defeat. It lost no important war, yet it did not survive the pox. Perhaps it simply lost sight of what it once intended to be, then blundered aimlessly until it was exhausted. What is left of it now, what it has become, I do not know. And then comes some commentary again. Taylor Franklin Bancole was my father. From his writings, he seems to have been a thoughtful, somewhat formal man, who wound up with my strange, stubborn mother, even though she was almost young enough to be his granddaughter. My mother seems to have loved him, seems to have been happy with him. He and my mother met during the pox when they were both homeless wanderers, but he was a 57-year-old doctor, and she was an 18-year-old girl. And gives us the same background that we all got when we read the last book. And says that the subtext of some of his writing is that he wanted to take care of this strange young girl, and marrying her was as close to, was going to be the best way to do that. And also he was lonely, but that there was something about her that made him be instantly protective of her. So then we go to one of Lauren's journals, September 26th, 2032. This is quite a jump. 5 years from when the previous book ended. She is describing a nightmare, and she is back in church at her home when her father would preach from their house and people would come over to their house. And she's doing the usual managing and wrangling of her little brothers that she has always been assigned as a kid. And her stepmother is there and everything. And then all of a sudden, her mother is sitting next to her and never turns and looks at her, but is very beautiful and dressed in the same clothing that she was in this picture that she had before Keith took it and ruined it on purpose and then tried to claim that it was an accident. Because, of course, he did, because Keith is pure trash. Keith is just one of those that, like, once he finally gets grabbed and killed, you're just kind of like, good, fucking finally. Like, he's just such a bad egg that as much as, like, the way that he was killed sounds truly horrifying, he completely chose that life. He stepped into it fully, eyes open, and was simply a bad person. And so this whole thing about, like, him disappearing first, I'm just kind of like, well, whatever. But then, like, he vanishes. Her mother is suddenly sitting there. And she's trying to get her mother's attention, can't get her to look at her. And we get some backstory on the Paracetamol, which is the drug that her mother had been taking. It is apparently was meant for Alzheimer's patients to get their mental faculties, like, back working and make really good use of whatever they had left. But it resulted in a drug that enhanced the mental faculties of well people to such a point that any students were... It sort of acted like Ritalin in that it made you, like, really focused and made you come up with connections and thoughts more quickly and easily. And it was very, very addictive. So a lot of people abused it, and it resulted in births of children who had the same kind of hyper empathy and sharing that she has. She says there were once tens of millions of us. In spite of our vulnerability and our high mortality rate, there are still quite a few of us. Now, she's trying to reach out to her mother, and she can't quite reach her. And as she's reaching towards her mother, her father is continuing to preach, and he's preaching about the parable of the talents, and that there are people who are taking their talents and using them to multiply them and do good with them. And then there are people who hide them away and don't do anything with them. And that the Lord frowns on those who do not do good with what they have been given. And that if you don't do good with them, God will take your talent away entirely and give it to somebody else who will make decent use of it, and then you'll have nothing. So, yeah, for unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have in abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. When my father says these words, my mother vanishes. I haven't even been able to see her whole face, and now she's gone. I don't understand this. It scares me. I can see now that other people are vanishing too. Most have already gone. My father is gone. My stepmother calls out to him in Spanish the way she did sometimes when she was excited. No, how can we live now? They'll break in. They'll kill us all. We must build the wall higher. And she's gone. My brothers are gone. I'm alone. The house is ashes and rubble around me. It doesn't burn or crumble or even fade to ashes, but somehow in an instant it is a ruin, open to the night sky. And yeah, it just basically goes like this until she sort of herself begins to fade and fall away. And then she wakes up and notes that she never has the nightmares when Bankole is in bed with her. So that's interesting in and of itself. And then there's also the aspect of her not being sure exactly how much noise she's even making, because Bankole isn't there to tell her when this ever happens, which I find interesting. When a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? Just after dark, some group, some gang perhaps, attacked the Dove Tree place just north of us. There were yesterday at this time 22 people living at Dove Tree. The old man, his wife, his 2 youngest daughters, his 5 married sons, their wives, and their kids. All of these people are gone, except for the 2 youngest wives and the 3 little children they were able to grab as they ran. 2 of the kids are hurt, and one of the women has had a heart attack of all things. This fucking guys. Bankoli's treated her before. He said she was born with a heart defect that should have been taken care of when she was a baby, but she's only 20, and around the time she was born, her family, like most people, had little or no money. They worked hard themselves and put the strongest of their kids to work at age 8 or 10. Their daughter's heart problem was always either going to kill her or let her live. It wasn't going to be fixed. Man, the state of healthcare in this universe is basically like that. Those of you who are watching on video, at the moment it has calmed down, but those of you who watch on video consistently, I have a twitch on the right side of my face. And it varies how bad it is. I've been told that it's due to stress, which is very fucking helpful. But understandably, as it's gotten worse, my mother has gotten concerned and been like, well, what if something's really wrong? To which I always say, then I guess I'll die. Because I don't have the money for healthcare, and I don't have the money to go get an MRI. I paid $120 to see a doctor about it who told me to drink some Gatorade because I was probably stressed and maybe I just needed some either electrolytes or some like magnesium, I think was the mineral that he recommended. And he said, like, I could send you in for tests, but they're probably going to be nothing and they're expensive. This is where we live. For all I know, I've got some weird tumor pressing on a part of my brain that controls motor function on my face. I don't know. But I'll never know because I can't fucking find out. And there are a lot of people out there with worse shit going on than me who will never know what is wrong with them until they are about to die. And that's just how we live. It's 2019, and this is how we live in the richest country in the fucking world. That makes sense. Y'all, don't get me started. So she's talking about this attack that happened on these people at Dovetree. And they were all wearing, and this fucking is super creepy to me. They were all wearing belted black tunics that hung to their thighs that had white crosses on the front. And she says that they snuck in really quietly and then all pulled the triggers at once so that it was like an explosion, 20 or 30 guns going off at the exact same time. And that is simply not like, you know, those of us who have read the first book know that usually when there's roving gangs of thieves and rapists and slavers, basically, they are grab and go, smash and grab, right? Like they come in, they wreak havoc, they take who they want, they get out. This is a very organized operation. The people are in uniform, which is incredibly unusual. And they killed children. They killed everybody rather than try and take kids for trafficking, which is like the most common reason that communities like this get hit is for people to steal money or to steal children. Rather than doing that, they kill them, which is incredibly rare and really strange. These people are killing in order to kill. They are not killing in order to profit off of whatever. At least as far as we know right now. So this is just a weird situation that really concerns Lauren. And she makes the connection herself about the idea of crusaders, which is immediately, of course, what I thought of. With the crosses on their fronts and the fact that they're wearing like tunics. And she thinks to herself, and this is the part, guys, I hope you're ready. I wasn't. I hope you are. I couldn't help wondering whether these people with their crosses had some connection with my current least favorite presidential candidate, Texas Senator Andrew Steele Jarrett. It sounds like the sort of thing his people might do. A revival of something nasty out of the past. Did the Ku Klux Klan wear crosses as well as burn them? The Nazis wore the swastika, which is a kind of cross, but I don't think they wore it on their chests. There were crosses all over the place during the Inquisition, and before that during the Crusades. So now we have another group that uses crosses and slaughters people. Jarrett's people could be behind it. Jarrett insists on being a throwback to some earlier, simpler time. Now does not suit him. Religious tolerance does not suit him. The current state of the country does not suit him. He wants to take us all back to some magical time when everyone believed in the same God, worshipped him in the same way, and understood that their safety in the universe depended on completing the same religious rituals and stomping anyone who was different. There was never such a time in this country. But these days, when more than half the people in the country can't read at all, history is just one more vast unknown to them. Jarrett's supporters have been known, now and then, to form mobs and burn people at the stake for being witches. Witches in 2032. A witch, in their view, tends to be a Muslim, a Jew, a Hindu, a Buddhist, or in some parts of the country, a Mormon, a Jehovah's Witness, or even a Catholic. A witch may also be an atheist, a cultist, or a well-to-do eccentric. Well-to-do eccentrics often have no protectors or much that's worth stealing, and cultist is a great catch-all term for anyone who fits into no other large category and yet doesn't quite match Jarrett's version of Christianity. Jarrett's people have been known to beat or drive out Unitarians, for goodness sakes. Jarrett condemns the burnings, and this is key. Jarrett condemns the burnings, but does so in such mild language that his people are free to hear what they want to hear. As for the beatings, the tarring and feathering, and the destruction of heathen houses of devil worship, he has a simple answer. Join us. Our doors are open to every nationality, every race. Leave your sinful past behind and become one of us. Help us to make America great again. Guys, if you could have seen my face when I got to this part. He's had notable success with this carrot and stick approach. Join us and thrive, or whatever happens to you as a result of your own sinful stubbornness is your problem. His opponent, Vice President Edward J. Smith, calls him a demagogue, a rabble-rouser, and a hypocrite. Smith is right, of course, but Smith is such a tired gray shadow of a man. Jarrett, on the other hand, is a big, handsome, black-haired man with deep, clear blue eyes that seduce people and hold them. He has a voice that's a whole-body experience, the way my father's was. In fact, I'm sorry to say, Jarrett was once a Baptist minister like my father, but he left the Baptists behind years ago to begin his own Christian America denomination. He no longer preaches regular CA sermons at CA churches or on the nets, but he's still recognized as head of the church. It seems inevitable that people who can't read are going to lean more towards judging candidates on the way they look and sound than on what they claim they stand for. Even people who can read and are educated are apt to pay more attention to good looks and seductive lies than they should. And no doubt the new picture ballots on the nets will give Jarrett an even greater advantage. Guys, okay. First of all, I will point out the differences between this Jarrett and Trump. I feel the need to address this because it seems important for future. First thing is, she implies Jarrett may be a hypocrite, but he does seem like he's religious, like genuinely religious. Whether or not he follows those, those ideals is irrelevant to what he considers himself to be. I do not believe Trump is a Christian. I don't believe he considers himself a Christian. I believe he calls himself a Christian for the convenience and simplicity of it, but that he does not believe it, and he does not, in his mind, consider himself a Christian privately. And I think that that is him being opportunistic. Also, Trump is not attractive. And I'm not going to get into the body shaming and all of that people talk about, because I think that's bullshit. But she's framing Jarrett as being a larger than life sort of movie star type that is very attractive in a simple physical way, that draws the eye and draws attention. And Trump has managed to draw the attention. He, I think, managed to sidestep the necessity of being attractive by having name recognition. He shortcutted all of that, like, what's the word I want? He shortcutted the necessity by being so wealthy. And I say that with an asterisk, because we all know that much of that wealth is not real. But by being so wealthy in the eyes of our country and the history of our country, that his name is synonymous with being wealthy, with being expensive. And even though it is no longer true, and was barely true for any amount of time, that image that he cultivated has stuck. He and his PR people did a very good job there. And so while a lot of politics and a lot of salesmanship, which politics is, very closely linked with, does have to do with kind of an aspirational thing and people wanting to be like you and so voting for you or being interested in your product because they believe it will make them more like you. Usually that aspirational thing is about looking like a person, looking attractive, looking powerful, looking healthy, looking successful. Trump doesn't need to look like any of those things because he already had it so established that he was those things that now that he has passed the pinnacle of his powers in those departments, it doesn't matter anymore. Also, I would say, Jarrett sounds like he intends to be where he is. And I don't think Trump did. I think Trump ran as a vanity project. I think Trump ran for purely for his ego and did not believe that he would win and did not particularly want to win. And I think when he did, it was an unpleasant shock for him. I bet it was for Melania as well. And that now everything is going so incredibly poorly because he is so uninterested in the office that he has made no effort whatsoever to educate himself on how things work. Jarrett sounds like he is somebody who... This is not just his ego. He has a lust for power there. Trump's lust for power is purely tied in with a childlike excitement of getting to do what you want. But he doesn't have any actual plans. He doesn't have a vision. He doesn't have anything that he particularly wants. He just wants to be the guy in charge because he likes the concept of it. Jarrett, it sounds like, has a plan and a vision and a particular method that he would follow if he were to be elected. So Jarrett frightens me in a different way. A lot of people have been talking about hoping that Trump gets impeached and taken out of office. And while I 100% believe that should happen, I cannot help but be frightened of the idea of Mike Pence being the person to step in and take his place. Jarrett sounds to me much more like a Pence. And Pence is somebody who I feel has been overlooked so much because he is next to this bloviating buffoon who is so much larger than life in terms of what you would ever expect a person. How, some of the things that Trump has done and said are so far beyond having any sort of human capacity for shame that you'd just never buy that this was real. If you were watching him on a TV show, you'd be like, this isn't, y'all have overstepped a little bit. We know it's true. And so Pence's sinister, gross beliefs and dangerous ideologies have flown mostly under the radar, or at least, if people are aware of them, seem like a very secondary concern in comparison to a lot of the other stuff that we are facing right now. And I feel like I'm waiting for that shoe to drop. Trump at this point, I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping that he's on his way out and that these trials that we've been enduring come to something. But at the same time, we're going to wind up with a Jarrett afterward. And I'm not excited about that. So I just wanted to talk about that because obviously the Make America Great Again, the, dog whistle racism, the things used to be good and now they're not. I mean, this is all shit that we have all heard before. And it's really, really hard when you're dealing with people who seem to genuinely believe that things used to be better at one point in the past for no particular good reason. Like, there's no evidence that they can hold up except for the fact that, well, my family wasn't struggling. And you try and point to the obvious reason why, which is taxation was at but no, it's because of the foreigners coming in. It's because of the Mexicans. It's because of the gays. It's because of the Hollywood elites, whatever. Oh, guys. And we are Earthseed, coming back to the text. We're that cult. Those strange people in the hills. Those crazy fools who pray to some kind of god of change. We are also, according to some rumors I've heard, those devil-worshipping hill heathens who take in children, and what do you suppose they do with them? Never mind that the trade in abducted or orphaned children or children sold by desperate parents goes on all over the country and everyone knows it. No matter, the hint that some cult is taking in children for questionable purposes is enough to make some people irrational. That's the kind of rumor that could hurt us, even with people who aren't Jarrett supporters. I've only heard it a couple of times, but it's still scary. At this point, I just hope that the people who hit Dovetree were some new gang, disciplined and frightening, but only after profit. I hope. But I don't believe it. I do suspect that Jarrett's people had something to do with this, and I think I'd better say so today at the gathering. With Dovetree fresh in everyone's minds, people will be ready to cooperate, have more drills, and scatter more caches of money, food, weapons, records, and valuables. We can fight a gang. We've done that before when we were much less prepared than we are now. But we can't fight Jarrett. In particular, we can't fight President Jarrett. President Jarrett, if the country is mad enough to elect him, could destroy us without even knowing we exist. We are now 59 people, 64 with the Dovetree women and children if they stay. With numbers like that, we barely do exist. All the more reason, I suppose, for my dream. And then she talks about the Earthseed concept being her, quote, talent. And she's sort of wondering whether or not it would have been smarter to spread Earthseed more far and wide. But then she's like, I feel like that would just present a bigger target for Jarrett to zero in on, and maybe that's worse. Which I tend to think is true, at least at this point, that is worse. So then we go to chapter 2. We get another Earthseed poem, and then another aside from her child. The original 13 settlers of Acorn, and thus the original 13 members of Earthseed, were my mother, of course, and Harry Balter, and Zara Moss, and gives just a rundown of all of the people that we know from the previous book and how they met and all of this stuff. The land it settled on belonged to my father. All of this background information. And then every member of Earthseed learned to read and to write, and most knew at least 2 languages, usually Spanish and English, since those were the 2 most useful. Anyone who joined the group, child or adult, had to begin at once to learn these basics and to acquire a trade. Anyone who had a trade was always in the process of teaching it to someone else. My mother insisted on this, and it does seem sensible. Public schools had become rare in those days, when 10-year-old children could be put to work. Education was no longer free, but it was still mandatory according to the law. The problem was, no one was enforcing such laws, just as no one was protecting child laborers. My father had the most valuable skills in the group. By the time he married my mother, he'd been practicing medicine for almost 30 years. So then we get into a pretty fun story about everybody wondering about Bankole and the fact that he's a doctor. wondering, is he really a doctor? Is he good at being a doctor? What's the deal with him? Like, and genuinely wanting to take advantage, but being afraid of him, until there came a point where a woman's appendix burst, and apparently, they had been sort of waiting to call on him until they had no other choice. And when he gets summoned, he's so irritated at the fact that they nearly let this woman die rather than bring him in on it, that he like lectures them when he gets there and lets them all know that like what he thinks of them. And this winds up being taken seriously enough that these folks recommend him to another family and then another, until eventually the community around does all seem to trust him and come to him for help. And then comes a touching, like, ending paragraph of this little aside. Speaking of knowing people, I wish more than ever that I could have known my father. He seems to have been an impressive man, and perhaps it would have been good for me to know this version of my mother, struggling, focused, but very young, and very human. I might have liked these people, which I just feel like, oh, that sucks. Like, I don't know what happened, but I'm already sad about it because, we know the Lauren that we know from the first book, who was very young. She was 18 when she was writing all of that, What has happened in the meantime for her child to feel this way about her? Is it valid? Is the way her child feels based on not having the information that we have as readers, or is it that they have more information that matters more, that outweighs what we know? It's an interesting question. Okay, so here comes the next entry from Lauren. We have, it seems, a few people who think Jarrett may be just what this country needs, apart from his religious nonsense. The thing is, you can't separate Jarrett from the religious nonsense. You take Jarrett and you get beatings, burnings, tarrings, and featherings. They're a package, and there may be even nastier things in that package. Jarrett's supporters are more than a little seduced by Jarrett's talk of making America great again. He seems to be unhappy with certain other countries. We could wind up in a war. Nothing like a war to rally people around a flag country and a great leader. Nevertheless, some of our people, the Peralta and Faircloth families in particular, might be leaving us soon. I've got 4 kids left alive, Ramiro Peralta said yesterday. Maybe with a strong leader like Jarrett running things, they'll have a chance to stay alive. He's a good guy, Ramiro is, but he's desperate for solutions, for order and stability. I understand that. He used to have 7 kids and a wife. He lost 3 of his kids and wife to a fire set by an angry, frightened, ignorant mob who decided to cure a nasty cholera epidemic down in Los Angeles by burning down the area of the city where they thought the epidemic had begun. I kept that in mind as I answered him. Think, Ramiro, I said. Jarrett doesn't have any answers. How will lynching people, burning their churches, and starting wars help your kids to live? Ramiro Peralta only turned away from me in anger. He and Alan Faircloth looked across the gathering room, the schoolroom, at one another. They're both afraid. They look at their children. Alan has 4 kids, too. And they're afraid and ashamed of their fear, ashamed of their powerlessness, and they're tired. There are millions of people like them, people who are frightened and just plain tired of all the chaos. They want someone to do something, fix things, now. Anyway, we had a stormy gathering and an uneasy anniversary celebration. Interesting that they fear Edward J. Smith's supposed incompetence more than they fear Jarrett's obvious tyranny. That's a word. You all... Ugh, you guys. I have so many feelings on this, and I'm not going to get into, like, big detail here, but I have reached the lowest point in my life in terms of the tolerance that I have for people making excuse for the bullshit that we have been seeing. I simply can't and won't anymore. And if you come onto my page and you say the slightest shit that even sounds like borderline, like you are supporting anything like that, no. And if you come onto my friends' pages and you say anything like, and my friend does not check you on it, no. Absolutely not. The thing that's interesting here is that racism is passingly an issue. The deal with Jarrett is his religious nonsense. His racism is obviously existing. It's real and it's there. The fact that they're targeting people of different creeds and beliefs is certainly not purely on religious basis. But, it's the kind of thing where you have somebody approach someone who is born in this country, but they are accused of being illegal simply because of how they look. It's a similar thing where you're going to accuse somebody who looks like they're Middle Eastern of being Muslim and therefore being a heretic or something. There's no way that this kind of religious fundamentalism and racism don't go hand in hand. However, it's not specifically mentioned as a reigning problem. His religion and his beliefs due to that religion are really the thing. So somebody like this guy, Ramirez, is that his name? Ramiro? I just was reading it and I missed it. Ramiro Peralta. That is a Hispanic name. This is a dude who is not going to benefit from whatever he thinks this president can potentially do. This is a dude who thinks that if he is Christian and doesn't make any trouble, then he is going to be safe, because he doesn't understand the broader implications of what this man is doing, because he doesn't want to understand it. And this is true of, I know it's easy for us to be like, well, we know that black people and Hispanic people are not Trump supporters. No, you wish you knew that. But unfortunately, there were a shocking number of black and Hispanic and Asian Trump supporters, because these people are supporting the concept of someone protecting them and hurting other people. And they don't understand that in the eyes of white Christian Americans, they are the other people, and they don't see that. And you can go Google search, Hispanics who voted for Trump and regret it. And you will see stories of people who are being deported after voting for him and are shocked by it. And it's, just the fucking most predictable shit. But they didn't think that they were going to be the target. It's that tweet. I didn't think they were going to eat my face, said sobbing woman after voting for the leopard eat people's faces party. That's exactly what it is. You're hoping that they're going to hurt somebody other than you. And as long as they hurt someone other than you, they can hurt whoever they want, and you really don't care. And that's the thing that is so incredibly short-sighted and selfish and foolish. I can even respect a certain amount of selfishness if you're being practical and honest about it. But this is a selfishness that's denial. And that I can't fucking understand, because it's simply so short-lived. And you're going to get such a rude awakening, the likes of which you will probably never experience again, because you'll be dead. And it's so frustrating to read this section, because we have all been in this situation. And I have some people that I have considered friends who still equivocate a lot on points like this. And I simply cannot tolerate it anymore. I'm starting to really get to a point in my life where I have to ask myself what I'm getting out of certain relationships, and be really brutally honest and just cut ties. And there are people that I'm still holding on to that I probably shouldn't, but you want people to grasp it and get it. And it's so fucking frustrating. So anyway, Lauren in this entry is talking about how they had spotted an abandoned house that had these agave plants growing nearby that had been basically left to their own devices and had grown to these enormous proportions. And those of you who have never seen agave plants that have been allowed to grow, they are insane looking. It's almost bizarre, like you've been shrunk, because a lot of plants, when they grow to certain heights, the rest of the proportions change and the ratio from height to width changes as they grow. And so they look like a very different plant. But agave and aloe, the ratios of width and height tend to stay pretty close to the same as they grow. So it just feels like they've been exploded. Like they've just, somebody used a ray gun on them, and it's really, really weird. So she's going there with Natividad Douglas, Michael Cardos, and there's another guy there too. Oh, Jorge, right. Jorge is also a sharer, I'm pretty sure. And they're walking up, and they just manage to see that behind the ruins of this building is a truck, and they call it a house truck. And they, like the way that this is described, that this is a house truck that has like armor on it. It has automatic gunfire that is probably like computer controlled. It's the kind of thing that is common enough that they all seem to be perfectly aware of its capabilities. They're not sure just how updated it is and how new it is, but in terms of like what it is and could do, they have a pretty clear grasp. So these things have been around for a little while. And they're sitting there and they're waiting, and when they move again, like the guns seem to go off again. And they keep on being confused because then they hear the sound of a child crying. And they're all, worried about a kid being out there alone. And the kid crying sounds very clear. This is not something coming out over speakers. This isn't like it sounds like this is a kid crying from inside the truck, and the truck's doors are open, and that's why they can hear us so clearly, which doesn't make any sense. If you're in something like that house truck, you'd have the doors closed. You'd be using the armor of the car to its full advantage. So Michael then is like, well, maybe the crying is meant to lure us out, because apparently people do that. And we get a little like aside about Michael and the fact that he is a pretty suspicious person. Michael agreed to join us because he was terrified that in spite of his odd jobs, begging, stealing, and scavenging, his wife and babies might starve. We never asked more of them than that they do their share of the work to keep the community going, and they respect Earthseed by not preaching other belief systems. But to Michael, this sounds like altruism, and Michael didn't believe in altruism. He kept expecting to catch us selling people into slavery or prostituting them. He didn't begin to relax until he realized that we were in fact practicing what we preached. Earthseed was and is the key to us. We had a way of life that he thought was sensible, and a goal, and a destiny that he thought was crazy, but we weren't up to anything that would harm his family, and his family was key to him. Once he accepted us, he and Noriko and the girls settled in and made Acorn very much their home. They're good people. Even Michael's suspiciousness can be a good thing. Most of the time, it helps keep us alert. So the whole thing with these guns is really like, it's all confusing for them. The fact that they keep missing, hitting them, because if they have automatic targeting like they should, it shouldn't be any problem for the guns to take them out. And they're like kind of about to check it out when the guns go off again, and they realize that the guns aren't shooting at them this time. They're all shooting at something else, and they hear somebody screaming. So they use this moment where the guns are sort of like distracted going after somebody else, that to go up and examine what is going on. It turns out that there are a couple of children in this truck that are really, really filthy, probably starving. And there are some adults in there. One of them is definitely dead, and the others look like they're dead, but have very faint heartbeats. The kind of situation where these people could easily die. If they come back, like God knows what kind of like health issues they'd be dealing with. But I was shocked that anybody was still alive. There's maggots in the wounds of the guy who's dead, but there's also maggots in the wounds of those who are still alive. Things are not looking great. And these little girls, I think it's 2 little girls, are really like in a bad, bad way. And it seems like the little girls were not controlling the guns on this thing, that they're set to like autopilot kind of, because the family probably had some precautions in place for keeping these kids from being able to mess with any of the settings of the truck. So yeah, this is just, and Jorge sees them and like throws up. And for her part, Lauren's just praying to God that none of the people who are injured wake up while they were, moving them, because they're obviously going to take them back to Acorn with them. But she's just so worried that they're going to come back to consciousness, because if they do, she'll be able to feel the pain. While they're unconscious, she can't feel it. And obviously what they are experiencing would be really, really terrible. So Jorge stood watch at the monitors once his stomach settled. Natividad had calmed the other little girl and found a clean cloth and some water. These she used to wash the child's face, hands, and arms. Michael had left the wounded woman and boy to examine the truck's controls. Of the four of us, he was the only one who knew how to drive. "Any trouble?" I asked him. He shook his head. Not even any sign of booby traps. I guess they would have worried about the kids springing them. So they head home, and this part, she talks about how all of the things on the truck are working. The little girls must not have understood how to use them and had not known how to drive. Who could little children go to for help after all? If they had no adult relatives, even the police would either sell them illegally or indenture them legally. Indenturing indigents, young and old, is much in fashion now. The 13th and 14th Amendments, the ones abolishing slavery and guaranteeing citizenship rights, still exist, but they've been so weakened by custom, by Congress, and the various state legislatures, and by recent Supreme Court decisions, that they don't much matter. Indenturing indigents is supposed to keep them employed, teach them a trade, feed them, house them, and keep them out of trouble. In fact, it's just one more way of getting people to work for nothing, or almost nothing. Little girls are valued because they can be used in so many ways, and they can be coerced into being quick, docile, and disposable labor. Yikes. And listen, guys, I've already said in the last episode how I feel about the current U.S. prison system, but it is legalized slavery, and I am all for abolishing the prison system. I think it's garbage. I think it does much more harm than good. I don't think it's useful. I don't think it was thought out to be useful. And I hate it, and it's fucking corrupt and horrifying, and no good has come out of it. Like, really. Ugh. Anyway. So in terms of the two people that they find, if the boy lives, Bankole doesn't know whether he'll be able to walk again. In terms of the woman, I don't think that we get a specific, Bankole is working on their mother and brother. He was not happy to have new patients. He says he doesn't know whether he'll be able to save this new mother and son. But he'll do his best. The girls have been lucky, at least, in having us find them. So I better wrap this up because I have only a couple of minutes left. But Bankole is really, really mad at Lauren for putting everybody at risk in order to get a hold of this house truck. And she is very adamant about the fact that this house truck was worth the risk. And he's like, the risk of everyone's lives. And she's like, we didn't risk anyone's lives. Nobody got hurt. Everything is fine. Can you stop talking about it as if somebody died? And he's like, well, you should treat things as if somebody had died. Like, you should consider that that's a very possible reality. But she's like, it didn't happen. I don't know why you keep harping on what could have happened. Plenty of things could happen. It didn't. Move on. And he's just really irritated about this. Then he asks her what she'd think about moving out into another town. And she's not really that into it. I think she likes the safety of where they are. I think she also likes being able to spread the gospel of Earthseed where they are. I just, this doesn't really appeal to her. And he's sort of just brings it up to see how she'll react, but then sort of drops it. And he says, and he ends it with, thinking is all I can do about it right now. I'm thinking about a safe place for us, a safe place for you when I'm dead. I winced. I'm an old man, girl. I don't kid myself about that. Bancole, I have to think about it. I want you to think about it too. Do that for me. Just think about it. And that is the end of chapter 2. So yeah, lots of surprises with the start of this book, folks. Lots of them. I really enjoyed this, though. It was just so unexpected, and it takes such a different tone when you're reading it from the perspective of her child, who is very disillusioned, and coming from such a different place in the history as well. You know, because I opened this book expecting to be back in the world that I had just left, but so much has changed in the time since we've been with Lauren that it really makes you want to know, like, what else has changed. It makes you want to pay attention because you don't feel like you already know enough, which I think is smart on behalf of the author. So yeah, anyway, thank you very much to Danique for commissioning this next, the book following it up. I hope that all of you enjoyed my coverage. And if you would like to commission something, you can go to unspoiledpodcast.com/shop. And until next time, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.